Well, welcome to the men's shed for this afternoon. Just a couple of things to update you on. Firstly, this recording I am having to redo after our meeting because I forgot to hit the record button until Brian had started his talk and his slides. So I'm re-recording this, so it might be slightly different to those of you who are at the meeting and might remember what went on. Just a couple of things to update you on. We're still looking for a permanent home for our shed, of course. There are one or two possibilities that are appearing. Nothing definite yet, but things might be looking a bit hopeful. And secondly, I'd like to thank those of you who have been helping with the bus conversion with the Basingstoke Shed group. I know a number of you are actively engaged in that now. So thank you very much for joining with them and helping them along. And also with the Green Health Project, I know a number of you are offering to volunteer down there as well. So thank you very much for you guys. It's great to join with these other groups and network with them, and I'm sure they really appreciate you being there. So today, myself and Brian are going to present you with a talk about some work that we have done over the years in Uganda. So I'll just go into my screen share and we'll get things started. So here we are. So where is it and why Uganda? Well, Uganda is in Africa, as I'm sure most of you probably know. It is in pretty much the center of Africa here, just above Lake Victoria. It is actually classed as being in East Africa. This is slightly to the right of the center really of Africa, but it is classed technically as East Africa. And this is Uganda. You can see down the bottom here is Lake Victoria. Kampala is the capital. Entebbe is where the main airport is, which was famous for the hijacking of a plane and the Israelis storming that a number of years ago, which I'm sure most of you remember. Quite a few lakes around in Uganda. It's quite a lush country, vegetation-wise, beautiful country, and pretty much on the equator, as you can see there. So some Uganda facts. It's classed as East Africa, as I said. It's often called the Pearl of Africa because of all the vegetation and how beautiful a country it is. 1894, it became a protectorate of the British Empire, hence a lot of links with Uganda. It goes back a long time, obviously, and there are lots of links with Britain coming back over the years. So they gained independence in 1962 from Britain. In 1971, Idi Amin ousted President Obote. As we all remember, Amin was a bit of a despot. In 1972, he expelled all the Asians because he felt they had all the wealth in the country and were monopolizing the economy. And he wanted to keep that wealth for his own people. And in 1979, there was a war between Tanzania and Uganda, and that ended Amin's rule. And he then went into exile and eventually died. The population in 2018 was 42.8 million people. It has risen quite a bit since then, I believe. But the percentage of those under 15 was 48%. So it's quite a high percentage. It's quite a young population. People don't tend to live to a great old age in Uganda. 49% were between 15 and 65, but only 2.5% over 65. On our first trip out there in 2003, I actually had my 50th birthday, and I became a bit of a celebrity with the people we were staying with because I'd reached such an age and was still relatively fit and healthy. So yes, they don't have a huge older population because of all the poverty and how hard things are in day-to-day living. As I said, it's on the equator. Here I am with my wife and my two sons, and the chap sitting down there It's called Martin. He was our main contact initially with Uganda. The reason we went to Uganda was that he paid a visit to the UK. He met one of our lady church members who had some experience of Africa in her past, and so they forged a bit of a link, and it all started from there, really. Let's say it's a beautiful country. This is a lake over in the west of the country. We went on a bit of a safari on our first trip for about 4 or 5 days, and this was one of the places we visited. It's really stunning. As I say, our first visit was in 2003. It was a church-based visit. We took a number of teenage-aged people, children, out to Uganda so they could experience a different culture and a different way of life, and just broaden their experience of what it's like to live in totally different surroundings, different culture. The building on the left you can see is the church building, and the buildings at the back were designated to be offices for the church, but they'd actually cleared them all out and put some beds in there, and that's where we stayed, in those offices. Although the boys actually stayed in Martin's house, which is about 4 or 5 miles away, but the rest of the adults and the girls stayed in these offices. This was the first church building that all they could afford. You can see it's very basic construction, but a tarpaulin, a few reeds for the walls, and some corrugated tin on the roof. As you can see, it's raining heavily when I took that picture. When it does rain, it tends to rain quite hard for a short period of time, and then it dries up very quickly. So you're either slipping and sliding around on mud, or you're struggling with a lot of dust from the dirt roads. It's sort of one or the other, really. This is probably the construction of that first church, what it would have looked like. This is obviously a different building, but you can see basically some trees are being chopped down and stripped, and then it's formed into a framework which they would then cover. So very basic and pretty flimsy, really. Cooking, they don't have much in the way of gas or electricity. Electricity is very sporadic, and they don't have electric cookers and that sort of thing. So they use charcoal stoves. You can see there's 3 charcoal stoves here. Charcoal is the main source of fuel for their cooking, and it seems to work quite effectively, but it obviously takes quite a long time to prepare and cook meals in that method. So a lot of the ladies' time is spent getting the food and then cooking. This is a view, a number of children from the area, all very excited to see these white people. But in the background is the toilet block. So you can see top of 3 doors just above the wall there. The 3 latrines, and the area to the left, which is uncovered, doesn't have a roof. That was a sort of washing area. So you take a bowl of cold water in there and strip off and have a wash. No showers or anything like that. This is the inside of a latrine. So it's just a hole in the floor down into a deep pit that you have to squat over. So you have to be pretty good aim and pretty agile to be able to use these latrines. And this is a latrine being dug. As you can see, they go down quite a depth. The walls are just completely vertical. There's no shoring to support the excavation. The guy just gets down there on a makeshift ladder. The ladder's probably then pulled up out of his way, and he'll just keep on digging down, and the spoil brought up on a bucket and a rope. Quite hazardous occupation. I think a number of these guys do get regularly killed by the sides collapsing, but I guess in general the soil's pretty stable. Just if they're in a slightly different area, and perhaps the ground isn't quite so good, that these guys suffer the ultimate consequence of being buried alive. But that's how they deal with their toilet facilities. Occasionally you might find somewhere that has what we would class as a water closet, but they're very few and far between because they use so much water, and things tend to break down quite quickly out there and get broken, and they can't afford to replace them. So pit latrine is the norm. Here, the hole has been dug and Brian is laying some bricks around the top just to level it all up, and then they'd cast the concrete slab on top and then build the structure on top of that. This is one of our young people in 2007 on a visit. This is the essential latrine kit at night time. So he's got his head torch on, so he doesn't have to hold a torch while he's trying to squat over the latrine. You can still see what's happening. He's got his toilet roll and some string around his neck so he doesn't lose that either. So that was deemed as an essential latrine nighttime kit. This is a local market. You can see all the market stalls in the background with various fruit and vegetables. But all these green bananas in the foreground here, they are the plantain type of banana. They're not the yellow sweet ones that we eat over here. It's a staple food. It's cheap. It does take a lot of these bananas to make a meal, which they basically peel them and mash them up and then wrap them in banana leaves and steam it for a couple of hours, and you get this stodgy sort of mass which doesn't taste of a great deal, to be honest. To liven it up, they put some ground peanuts sauce on it, so just unroasted, just a natural peanut ground into a paste and then heated up with some water, and then add that to make it a bit more palatable. It does take some getting used to. It's not a favourite diet of us from England, but they have to rely on it a lot as it's very cheap. Here are some local shops, and you can see the state of the road there, just a dirt road. On the right hand side of the picture there's a load of rubbish. That's where the rubbish from the shops, I guess, they come out and just chuck it all over there, and eventually it might get burnt or just decays away, but they don't have any refuse collections or anything like that. Here's a guy earning a living collecting water. So very few places have running water. If you're lucky, there might be a tap somewhere in the locality that they can go and pay and get some water from there, or they'll go to a stream or a pond or something and get it out of there. So you have to be very careful drinking the water. We would always use some sterilisation tablets to make it safe, even if it came out of a tap. But this guy would use these jerry cans to fill up and deliver them back to people's houses. So that was his way of earning some money. If you're lucky, there might be a borehole. This is one that you can see has been installed. The girl on the left's got the handle to pump it up and down, and in the centre there you can see the spout filling the yellow jerry cans. In Kampala, this is a view of the taxi park. So to get around the country, longer distances, there are buses, sort of big bus type coach service, but the local transport are these Toyota minibuses, and you just flag it down on the side of the road if you're going into Kampala, and you jump in, or you get squeezed in, because these things have a seating capacity of about 12 as normal, but it's quite normal for there to be 16, 20 people in these things. You just get squashed in with the chickens and everything else, just to make as much money for the guys. You have a driver and another guy assisting who will be looking out for the passengers and taking the money, etc. And this is quite a chaotic taxi park, although they seem to have a system and make it work. Having been into Kampala, if you want to get your taxi back, because we were living near on the sort of outskirts of Kampala, you then have to find the right queue of taxis that is going to the destination that you want. It's quite interesting to make sure you got the right one. Could easily get the wrong taxi and end up going in the wrong direction. This is a typical street in Kampala, very busy, as you can see. There's lots of traffic, lots of taxis. It's quite a cosmopolitan city. There are some high-rise buildings, quite modern. The city is, being the capital, is obviously relatively wealthy in terms of the rest of the country, but is extremely busy, as you can see on the roads there. This is out in rural areas, you still get these sort of mud huts. They might be used more nowadays for keeping livestock or something, but some people do still live in these sort of conditions. So it goes from modern Kampala right back to the very basics out in the rural areas. This is a typical village road. You can see the amount of dust that's kicked up by the traffic, and a few shops and that on the left-hand side. And travelling around the country is always interesting. There are some tarmac roads, but they're pretty few and far between. So most of the roads are just dirt roads. You can see here, one lorry has lost its load on the left there. Another one trying to get past it all. Looks like it's about to topple over. We were stuck waiting for all this to clear so we could get through. But travelling around is always interesting on the roads. And transporting goods, they just do it however they can. This guy on this motorbike got some timber on the back there, just strapped across the seat, and off he'll go. He'll take that back to wherever he needs to use it. It's quite precarious, obviously quite difficult to balance, I'd imagine. And obviously a wide load, you meet someone coming the other way on a fairly narrow road, it always gets quite interesting. Excuse me. As is this one. They don't worry about overloading a bike. They just pile stuff on. How they manage to keep it on there and how the guy on the top manages to stay on, I don't know, but somehow they do. Always very entertaining. They maintain the roads of sorts, so when it gets a bit too potholed, they'll come along with a grader and grade it all off to smooth it out again. There's no warning of this. You just come along the road and suddenly you're faced with a machine in the middle making a mess of the road. You see there's a couple of push bikes here in front of us trying to navigate through all the work that's going on there, and you just have to make your own way past them. When they decide to let you get past, you bump over the ground and try and make your way through. There's a picture from inside the taxi that we were in, looking at this grading going on. We were waiting for it just to move aside to get through. And you can see the state of the windscreen on the taxi. That's not unusual. It's full of cracks and where it's been bounced around on so many rough roads. We were at one church one day when the graders came along to regrade the road, and as they did so, because they push some surplus material where they've leveled it all out, just gets pushed to the side of the road. So where we had driven into the entrance of the church area, there's now about an 18-inch, 2-foot high mound of loose soil to get over in our minibus, which was quite interesting to try and get the vehicle out of there without any tools to dig our way out. But we eventually managed to bounce over it without damaging the minibus too much, I think. This was one of the projects we have been to. This is back in 2006. This is the classrooms for a school that was looking after some orphan children that we were working with and raising money for. So they managed to build the classrooms, very basic, no doors or windows, no concrete floors, and a corrugated tin on the roof. That's what this looks like inside. So they've got a few benches for the children to sit on. The very right of the picture, you can see a desk and a bench that are fixed together there. That was the exception at this time. Most of the children just had to sort of sit sideways and write in their exercise books on the seat they were sitting on the bench, or they'd kneel on the floor and use the bench as a desk. And as you can see, it's just a mud floor. So in the mornings, they probably scatter some water over that to keep the dust down a bit. But of course, it dries very quickly, and then everything gets very dusty, and there's no windows, so all the dust blows in from outside, etc. One of our first visits, one of the jobs we did was to paint the inside of the church, which was in one of the very earlier photos when we were first arriving there. That church building was rendered internally but wasn't painted. So with the young people we took out with us, we painted all the walls and painted some decorations on it as well. Excuse me. The lady who first linked us up with Uganda, she had this house built on some land of one of the other guys that we were working with, so that we had somewhere to stay when we went out there, and she had somewhere to stay. This is quite a luxurious construction by typical standards. It's got a reinforced concrete frame and then bricked in and rendered, and it's got a tiled roof, clay tiled roof, which is an expensive option, but obviously much better than a corrugated tin roof. So you can see there's some reinforcing bars sticking out the side for a possible extension, I guess, or maybe they just decided to leave them sticking out, I don't know. You can see on the close-up here the state of the concrete on this column up on the first floor. It's not the best quality. As you can see, there's a lot of what we call honeycomb and a lot of gaps in the concrete where it hasn't been compacted and filled properly in the shuttering when it was made. But they don't seem to worry about that. That's quite normal, and it hasn't fallen down yet, so I guess it's okay. Here's another example of some rather poor work. I mean, I'm not trying to deride the guys out there. They do their best with limited resources and without any training. They just try and do what they can. This is a staircase on the orphanage, the school that we helped buy the land for and helped fund. They built a house for some visitors to stay in. It's now actually being used as a bit of a medical centre. But this was a staircase, external staircase at the time, going up onto what could be a first floor. It's actually just a concrete roof at the moment. Could be extended in the future if they get some more money. But that concrete roof hasn't had any waterproofing or anything, so when it does rain, it does get very damp, and the whole building inside was quite damp a lot of the time, despite it being a warm, dry country generally. The concrete would hold some moisture, and it's not ideal. But this concrete staircase, you can see how thin the concrete is here on what we call the string of the stair. There will be some reinforcing rods in there, but it's an extremely thin section there. It doesn't look particularly strong, and the quality of the concrete, again, is not brilliant. This was the upper flight up onto the roof. You can see it's a lot thicker. The string here is a lot thicker, probably thicker than it actually needed to be. So one flight is very strong, and the other flight looks very weak. But that's how it is. Another view of it there. You can see how thin the concrete is. This is the house I was talking about, and the flat roof, as you can see. And in the background there is a water tower with a bit of a makeshift ladder going up to the top. But because they don't have any mains water provision, to fill this up, they get a lorry, a tanker lorry full of fresh water, which would come whenever it was needed to pump water up into the tank on the top. And then it would just be gravity fed down into the house. So there was actually a shower of some sorts and a flushing toilet in there, which more or less worked. But again, the design of this water tower, to me, those columns and the height all looks a bit slender to me. Doesn't look the strongest of structures. They had been making a load of fence posts to fence off their land, and they'd been making these on site and made some molds and concreted them. And in fairness to them, these look pretty good. They look quite good bit of concrete work. They look quite consistent, and I think they made a good job of those. This is a typical wood yard in Kampala. If you want to go and get some wood, you don't go to B&Q, you go to a wood yard, and Brian would explain a bit more about that later on, I think. On the visit in 2014, one of the jobs I did was to make some shelves for the classrooms. They hadn't got anywhere to store their books or anything. They were just sort of on the floor or on desks and benches. So made some fairly basic shelves just to let them put some books on there. There's another picture there. This is one of the dormitory blocks at the orphanage cum school, which was built in 2008, as you can see. That's how it looked when we got there. One of my tasks was to paint some of the front elevation there. This was the ladder they gave me to use. As you can see, it's a few bits of tree nailed together and a few bits of wood nailed on there. Very precarious. I didn't feel at all safe going up there to do the painting. And here I was footing the ladder. The young lad, I'm not sure he's doing a great deal to support it in the middle because it was quite flexible, that ladder, but seemed to survive using it. And there's one of the lads from the school up the top doing some painting. He seemed quite happy sitting up there. And that was the finished result, which certainly looked a lot brighter than when we arrived. So a couple of guys mixing some concrete. I see they just got some rough stones and some sand and a bit of cement, and they'll mix it up. Again, no real health and safety. They're just wearing flip-flops. I mean, in this country, you'd be pilloried for working like that, getting cement burns on your feet, etc. But they're obviously a lot tougher in Uganda. And having mixed up the concrete, they then barrow it to wherever it's needed. You can see this guy here is barefoot. It's raining at the time, so it's probably very slippery and muddy, and he's trying to wheelbarrow a full barrow of concrete around, which is quite heavy and obviously pretty dodgy and slippery conditions. Making the bricks, they make their own bricks if they possibly can, so the ground is quite a good consistency, quite clay for making bricks. So they'll just dig out the soil, break it up into a fairly fine sort of tilth, mix a load of water with it so it makes it into a nice sort of clay mixture, and then put it in molds to make their own bricks. And again, you see he's just they're barefoot, he's up to his knees in this mud sort of slurry, quite happy about it obviously. And once they've made the bricks, they'll lay them out to dry under some grass you can see on the right hand side there until they've dried completely. This is a guy making the bricks in a mold, so they'll put the sort of slurry into the mold to make the bricks, and you can just about see in the bottom left corner there some of the bricks sort of being left to dry out there. They might be stacked up into a big stack once they're dried until they need to be used, and if you're lucky, they might actually fire them. They might actually be able to make them a bit harder by actually firing them. And then once the bricks have been made, they'll be delivered to where they're going to be used, but just tipped out back of a lorry normally, not handled that carefully. Here's a bit of bricklaying going on. As you can see, the bricks that they make are quite a bit bigger than the bricks that we would use in the UK. Although they use a mould, of course, as they dry out, the sizes do vary a bit, and they're not totally straight a lot of the times. And something I found quite strange is they do tend to use an awful lot of sand cement in the joints. The cement is the most expensive thing from their building point of view, so they can make their own bricks, and the sand's not too expensive, but the cement is, yet they seem to use an awful lot of it. So you can see here the bed joints and the joints between the bricks are really quite big. That's, I guess, partly because the bricks are not that straight and they have to allow for a bit of the curve in the bricks, etc. But even so, they do use an awful lot of cement, which I find a bit strange, but that's the way they do it. There's another picture there. So you can see they have got a bit of polythene down as a damp-proof course near the bottom of that wall. It's not as thick as we would use here. It's only like thin polythene sheeting, but they do use a string line to lay their bricks to get it straight. So that's good. Here's a bit of typical scaffolding. I'm not sure what they were doing on this building, whether they'd been doing the rendering or whether they're doing something up on the roof, but very makeshift, all very precarious, not much of it at all, but that's all they have to make use of, I guess. And this was one of the classrooms where they're rendering the brickwork inside. Again, you can see there's got a bit of an A-frame that sort of leans against the wall and one plank across it that the guy's working on. When they do their rendering, they don't tend to use a large steel float like we would do when we're plastering in this country. They just seem to mix up their sand cement, which you can see on the floor there, and then they flick it onto the wall with just a small pointing trowel. So they spend ages just flicking the sand cement onto the wall, and then they will sort of rule it off fairly flat with a straight edge piece of timber, and then they might go over it with a plastic float to smooth it off and just make it reasonably presentable. I tried doing some, and it took me an awful lot longer to get the render on the wall with a small pointing trowel, trying to flick it on there. And I probably have more on the floor than on the wall, to be honest. But they're obviously well practiced at it. And this was a building in Kampala, I think, and typical access scaffolding to get up to the upper floors. So they didn't always have cranes around to lift all the materials up. So if there were concrete in the floor or whatever, taking bricks and mortar and whatever up there, they'd have guys pushing wheelbarrows up these ramps, which are quite steep. And wheelbarrows get pretty heavy when they're full, but they'd be pushing all materials up this fairly rickety scaffolding access. And they don't wait for a building to be completely finished. If the lower floors are pretty much finished, they start using them, while the upper floors, you can see here, are still being constructed, or maybe this run out of money and couldn't afford to do any more, so it's just been left. One of the projects our young guys did on one of our visits was to try and make a wheelchair for a disabled lad out there. So they went and bought some bicycle wheels and a bit of a old bicycle frame and chopped it up and stuck it together and put a bit of a wooden seat on the top there to make a bit of a makeshift wheelchair, which I think worked reasonably well. And I think the young guy who it's presented to was really, really pleased with it. In 2006, when my wife Janet and I were out there, Janet was a dentist, so she did some dental treatment, but it was rather chaotic in as much as once the word got out locally that there was some free dental treatment, just everybody and his uncle turned up, and were just overwhelmed with the number of people. And obviously the type of treatment that Janet could do is fairly limited. But we wanted to try and improve on that. So in 2007, the two of us went back to look at the dental health provision in the area. And we visited the dental school in Kampala as a starting point to see what the best provision was in the area. In the capital, they got the dental school associated with the main hospital. So this was the outside of the building. Excuse me. They had been donated a lot of second-hand surplus equipment. I think some of this came from a charity called Dentaid that works in the UK. And so this equipment had been sent out there. As you can see, it's all fairly old hat by modern standards. But unfortunately, they hadn't been able to install it to use it. So it was all just stored in this room in the dental school and not actually being used, which is a real shame because it's just a waste. You know, if someone got the resources, the money or the people to fix it all up, or the dentist to actually use it, which is a real shame. We did go out into the rural areas as well. We looked at some of the local so-called clinics, which were quite worrying in the people running these local village clinics were probably not really qualified medically at all. One or two did offer some very basic dental treatment, all very haphazard. But this was a rural hospital which had a dental surgery, and this was the state of the dental chair there, which you can see is extremely well worn. Obviously, all they've got to use. But while Janet was doing some treatment, we went back in 2014, and Janet decided she'd have another try at doing some dental treatment, but primarily just to treat the children in the schools and the orphanage. Didn't quite work out exactly like that. Some adults did get in there as well, but this was her dental surgery in one of the schools. So it's a couple of school benches pushed together with a bit of a thin mattress on the top. And here she is doing some treatment on a young lad. Janet was using some battery-powered tools. So we got a mirror with a light built into it, battery-powered, and also a little drill. Those of you who are probably all old enough to remember the slow speed drills that dentists used to use years ago that used to shake your head around. none of this high-speed stuff. So she had a small battery-powered drill as well, and the batteries were rechargeable by a little solar panel. So at the end of the day, you could recharge them. Just before I go on to that, just to go back, to sterilize the equipment at the end of the day, there's no ultrasonic sterilization, high temperature stuff as they'd use over here in a dental surgery. It was all done with a domestic pressure cooker on a charcoal stove. So it would be heated up on the charcoal stove and the instruments put into the pressure cooker to get the high enough temperature, and that would be left for an hour or two to thoroughly clean them and sterilize them, which took quite a long time to obviously do. So one of the limiting factors of how many people you could treat in a day was the number of instruments that we'd got. Once we'd used them all, they were all dirty through the day, well, that was it. You couldn't treat any more patients. This is some of the state of the wiring. If they have any mains power, yeah, I don't know who put this together, but I don't think it's a qualified electrician. All very haphazard again. On our safari, it's just a bit of an interesting picture, I thought. We stopped, our local guy said, oh, we'll stop here. There's a bat cave a few yards over there. Not really knowing what to expect. We walked up to the entrance of this cave, quite a big entrance to a cave. And this was the roof of the cave. It's absolutely covered with bats. These probably the size, I suppose they're about 8-9 inches tall, these bats. They're fairly big compared with what we get over in this country. Not as big as the fruit bats that you get hanging in the trees out in Uganda, but there was just so many bats in there. You couldn't see the roof of the cave. And you can imagine what it smelt like with all the droppings on the floor. It was quite overpowering. It's another picture of when we're away looking over a lake, the sunset. It's a beautiful country. And that slide you've seen earlier. So that's the end of my slides. So I'll just come out of that and to say, because I forgot to do the recording, I'll need to go into Brian's PowerPoint. So here we are, it's the first of Brian's slides. And Brian says that when you go out to Uganda, you have to pretty much be prepared to do anything and everything. And he just arrived on one of his early trips and fancied a cup of tea, bit of refreshments, and asked where the milk was. And he was told, out there in the cow, off you go. So he had to go out and very quickly learn how to milk a cow, which he said he found quite difficult and quite painful on his fingers to be able to get enough pressure to get the milk out of the cow. But as he says, you go out there, you have to be prepared to do it, absolutely anything that crops up. There's a few pictures of some of the things Brian got up to. Top left, you can see there, looks like he's installing something electrical. Picture in the middle there is doing some plumbing work, and top right is down in a hole. It seems to be half full of water, so I'm not quite sure what's happening there. But getting well and truly stuck in. On the bottom row there, doing some painting inside one of the houses or buildings, and in the middle there is his wife, Christine. She's doing some painting on the outside of one of the school buildings, which the local women especially found quite amusing. The fact that a white English lady was out there doing some manual work, doing some painting, which they found quite unusual. And the picture bottom right, that's the dormitory block that I painted the front of. This is a year or two earlier, and Brian's there fixing some wire mesh over the windows to try and stop mosquitoes getting in. Here's some really good looking benches for school room that Brian has made. He's made quite a number of them, you can see there, and a really good job. Fairly simply made, just screwed together, but yeah, great job. I'm sure been put to great use. And here is the woodyard that we saw earlier, and I think Brian will take over his slideshow from it.
important thing, and the thing that makes it easy, I use screws for everything, which out in Uganda is strange, because almost all the furniture out there is made with nails, and that's because they don't have, or it's not easy to get hold of screws, and they certainly don't have electric screwdrivers. But if you've got the drill and screws, it's surprising all the things that you're able to do. And this is one that you saw earlier. Just like most things in Uganda, it's fairly easy to do the job if you're able to get a hold of the material. Finding the materials of the right sort and the quality is always a bit of an issue. But this is the wood yard where we got the wood for the tables. This is an area, it's probably about an acre altogether, and all over this area are these little sheds, people in them, beaver in a way. There's no health and safety, of course. The atmosphere is full of dirt and dust. It's awful, really. It isn't the sort of place I'd like to work. And here they are again. And one of the strange things, if you want a piece of wood, if I went to the guy and asked him for a piece of 4x2, just what he would offer me is a log. And then he would actually divide up the log on the spot. Which is okay, it works. The only issue is, of course, the wood is wet, and as soon as you put a screw in it, you can see all the water oozing out. But then again, if you put it out in the sun for an afternoon or so, it's okay. You're able to use it. And of course, it's whenever you do anything out there, I always have it's a lot of helpers, and these are the kids from the school. You can say one of them there has my drill, which they all enjoyed using, and the saw. And if you notice, the boys and the girls as well. And I'll show you a little video. So here we get the expert. You notice how he holds the saw? I taught him well. Well, I thought I did. And so we had the older ones helping me on the job, but with all the offcuts I have, of course, as soon as they fall on the floor, the kids, they get hold of them, they grab them, and of course they end up making things, because these are the boys from and the girls from the orphanage, and they haven't had anything else to play with. They don't have toys or anything, so it's when they get the opportunity to play with wood, they really enjoy it. And here's the older ones. I give them a saw, a hammer, and a chisel. And if I'm able to, I buy them nails, and off they go. And of course, just what they end up with. This is a chair that they made, so they're good, really. I thought you might be interested in this job. One of the years we were out there, we bought a tank, and the idea was that just when it rains, all the water from the guttering is collected in the tank. But of course, over the years, it actually is corroded, and there was a hole in it, so we had to have it repaired. So we arranged just for the engineer to come. So this is the guy who was going to repair it. And he arrived with all his tools. He only had hand tools, a hammer, pliers, cutters, hacksaw, and of course the thing in the middle is his stove, which I think you saw earlier on some sides, charcoal, and the reason for having that you'll see a little bit later on. So he cut it out all by hand with a pair of hand snips, carefully, very, very, very carefully. He had it's a couple of sheets of material, which you can see he joined in the middle, tin material, and he folded over a seam, and then he hammered it in place, and then that's it. And then he fitted it. He hammered over the edges really, really carefully. But the part that I was the most impressed with was this. As in the iron that he has there is the sort we had in our house when I was at home 60 odd years ago, almost exactly the same iron. But as you can see, it's good. It works okay. The brushing he had in his hand was that's what he put the flux on with. And at the end of the day, when he put it all back together again, of course it was fine. We didn't have any leaks anywhere. And of course, just while everybody else is hard at work, while I'm asleep, well, I think it was to lunchtime actually, and in my defence, it was hot. This is one I wanted to show you. Those of you who know me will know I'm a cyclist, so I'm always interested in seeing the cyclists out. And this is a guy, as you can see, he's loaded up, he's on the main road, and he's riding along. Now, have no idea how he got all those things on there in the first place, and I've no idea how he could stay upright. Now, I've ridden one of these bikes. They don't have any gears, or they don't have any brakes. So as you can imagine, there's a few accidents out there. They're also heavy as well. But this guy, this is how he earned his living. And I've seen people with bikes with cement on them, water, pigs, even hens. So, but if you've got a bike and you're able to work, that's a way of earning a living. The final one I wanted to show you, one of the things we do when we go out there, we get shirts for the boys, football shirts for the boys, and we get the dresses for the girls. So this is an appeal. If you've got any children or grandchildren who have any football shirts or dresses, we would love to relieve you of them. And of course, the boys out there, they always amaze me because they know all about English footballers. They know who's in all of the teams. They know who the managers are. They know whereabouts the team is in the football league. And I should think the only experience that they've ever had of English football is on a small screen in a hut somewhere. And yet they are so enthusiastic that they put people like me to shame. Okay, that's all I wanted to show you for the day. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Okay. So if you want to ask us anything about our trips out there, if you want to unmute yourselves and ask us something, then please do.
Do you have any idea how they're all coping with COVID out there, or Has it impinged?
We have had some messages and some discussions from Seb Allwright. Those of you who know Seb is something that some of us has known from when he was born, same age as my eldest son. So they grew up together. He works as a missionary out in Uganda for African Inland Missions, and he's based out in Uganda, in Kampala. He tells us it's pretty hit and miss, pretty chaotic. They don't, the sort of publicised infection rates, etc., probably don't actually mirror what is actually happening out there. It's probably hard to gather the information. In Kampala, a lot of people are wearing face coverings, wearing masks, but as you can imagine, they haven't had lockdowns like we have. As far as I'm aware, the public transport, the boda bodas and the minibuses still operate, so people are crammed on there. And I don't think they've got very far with any sort of vaccinations. So I don't think it's desperate, but it's probably not that good. Seb seems to be keeping himself safe out there. Hopefully that will continue. So it's not. I don't think it's anything like the problems we've got in India at the moment, where it is absolutely horrendous. But yeah, it's probably not certainly not as good as it could be.
Those talks were brilliant, giving us an insight in what happens. Can I ask, the young people who went out with you, were they from the Tadley Basingstoke area?
They were all from our church at the time. So it was my two lads, Mark's family, Mark Ward, some other, it's all the young people from Tadley URC.
Yeah.
We went out another time where there were a few others, a couple of girls from, I can't remember where they were from, but there was some loose connection, and they sort of joined our group. So on subsequent trips, we did broaden it a bit, but yeah, certainly the first trip it was all from the church, sort of teenagers.
Brilliant what you did, you and Brian.
Yeah, it's certainly an eye opener to see a different culture.
If I could just add a couple of my experiences, it was probably about the same period going on a wildlife safari in Tanzania, and just my wife and herself with a local guide and driver. And when we used to go out on drives, the lodge we were staying at provided us with lunches for the day, so just a picnic lunch. And we had sandwiches and things that were wrapped up in plastic, sort of plastic containers that you would get in this country. And they always provided us with too much food. And our guide said, if he didn't want it, would it be okay if he gave it to the local Zulu herders who were herding the cattle? And we said, yeah, that's fine, absolutely fine. He said, otherwise it'll get thrown away. So it's absolutely great. And he was very careful to always unwrap the food and take off all of the plastic wrappers, because he said, if I don't do that, they'll just eat the sandwiches and the rubbish will get thrown away. And it's, as you had in one of your shots there, the amount of rubbish that was everywhere. So I thought, this is very kind, very considerate. But on the other hand, when he was driving down the roads, the dust roads, and huge clouds and clouds of dust, he would make no allowance for the people walking. He wouldn't slow down. He wouldn't drive on the opposite side of the road to avoid them where he could. He would just drive past at full belt, smothering them in dust. And I just thought, what a difference.
Yeah, some of their attitudes, yeah, you think it's a bit strange. I mean, one thing I found the first visit we went out there, I mean, it's understandable, those of them that do manage to see a television occasionally, their ambition is to be like the West, be like we are. That's what they perceive us as being, rich. Although by our standards, we're not rich in our country. But when you go out there, they see you as really rich. And if you're a white person, you've got money, you get all sorts of people asking you for money. But rather than have wooden chairs and wooden benches, they'd aspire to having plastic like garden chairs and things, because they're deemed to be much smarter and much more comfortable. The trouble is, once they break, which happens quite easily, they can't repair it. Whereas something wooden, you can mend it, can't you? And yeah, I mean they're okay. They do in Kampala have supermarkets not dissimilar to we have, but certainly in the villages, if you went out to buy some fish or some meat, it's just on a table out in the sun. It's not refrigerated. There'll be flies all over it. Just to make sure it's cooked extremely well before you eat it to kill off any bugs. We went to what they call the source of the Nile for a day trip and bought a couple of fish from a guy there who caught these fish tilapia. They're quite big fish, but instead of putting them in the minibus to bring them home, they had a bit of wire sort of through the mouth where they'd been hooked, and hung them on the windscreen wiper on the front of the van. So they're hanging down the front of the van, and then drove for an hour, back along the dusty roads through Kampala and back out the other side. That's how you got your fish home. So again, you're covered in dust and dirt and traffic fumes and whatever. But that's the way they seem to live. Very hand to mouth. I mean, they haven't got much money. Very, very different way of life, obviously.
Brian, you mentioned about if we had children's shirts and girls' clothing and so forth. Is there a list somewhere or a gathering point for all this?
Well, it's our house.
Bring it round.
Which is the gathering point for everything, which
right
upstairs in the loft, which is overflowing. No, the things that we're interested in really are the shirts, the football shirts. One of the reasons is because they're not heavy, they're nice and light. You can squeeze them up into a small space in the case. I mean, we would like to be able to take out other things. One of the things would be ideal would be able to take out shoes, but of course they're heavy, and you're only allowed a certain amount on the plane, and it's expensive if you go over the limit. Really, really expensive. It's expensive to the point where you're better off to buy things over there. But the shirts and the dresses are okay. I think we, on average, I think it's the last time we took out over 100 shirts and about 100 of the children's outfits as well for school. But that's the problem, is the expense if you go over the limit. I mean, we spend, well, I don't, but wife spends hours and hours sorting out the cases so they weigh exactly the right amount. So she squeezes in as much as she can. But I take over the tools, and that is, well, that's half a case, and you're allowed up to 4 for the pair of us. So we are limited, but the shirts and the dresses would be it's well received.
Right. Okay. Thanks very much.
Very much, Keith.
On the luggage, Janet and I, and the trip we went out on our own, just the two of us, the previous couple of times the flights have been booked as a charity ticket, so you got extra luggage allowance, and we booked through the same agency and assumed we'd got the same deal. And we arrived at the airport, we were taking loads of sheets and bedding stuff out for the orphanage. So we got up to our double allowance, because that's what we thought we'd booked. Went to check the cases in to weigh them in, and they said, "Oh, you're over your limit." So I said, "Well, no, we're not." We weighed them carefully. We hadn't got the charity limit. We'd only got a normal one. So we said, well, it's full of bedding and stuff for an orphanage. Yeah, we can't, it's not just clothes or anything. And I said, well, they were going to charge us an additional full ticket price to take these 2 cases. That's what they wanted. And I said, well, obviously we can't do that. We can't afford that. So this was at about 5 o'clock in the morning, you know, as you get an early flight. So the girl on the check-in desk said, look, you probably just about have time. Wait till 6 o'clock. The luggage shop over there, the other side of the terminal, will be open. Buy a couple of bags, the biggest cabin bags, walk-on bags that you can, and try and redistribute the luggage. So that's what we did. We bought a couple of bags and took a load of stuff out of the cases and had these extremely heavy cabin bags that we tried to walk on nonchalantly as if they didn't weigh anything. And we were still over the limit of our cases, but they, you know, they could see we'd done all we could, and they let us go as it was. But yeah, that was a bit frustrating at the time. But it is quite difficult to get stuff out there. We have in the past also tried to send a load of sewing machines out and tools with a mission agency, and that was going out in a container being shipped out there and across land. I don't think a great deal of it actually got there. You know, there's a lot of corruption in Africa. To get things across the border, things get held up and you have to pay a bribe to get it over. Things get mysteriously disappear on the way. So we decided it probably wasn't the best way of getting stuff out there either, because it's very hit and miss what actually ends up getting there, unless you can actually take it yourself.
So the other thing that I'm always interested, if anybody has any laptops, I like to take out laptops because out there they're like gold dust, and phones as well. So if you know anybody who's got any phones or
Yeah, give me the list.
I'd be interested in having them off you.
So do they have any power at all, or is it all from solar energy that the particular places you're going to?
Well, they have it, and in fact, some of the places where we started to go all those years ago, they didn't have any at all, but they haven't now. So the extent of the electric is on the increase, but of course it's intermittent. It isn't there all the time. It's not by any means, but it is beginning to grow. So yeah, when I was out there the last time, it was okay. The drill I took out, I was always able to charge, but it is intermittent. It is a little unreliable.
The house that was built for our lady from church that I showed you in one of my early slides, Brian, you actually put some solar panels up on the roof there, I think, didn't you?
No, just what happened, we had a professional in to do it, and I stood over him. I stood over him all the time, and I watched exactly what he did. And it's easy to do, really easy. So when we went out the following year, that's what I did. We fundraised here, and we were able to get enough money to buy a panel, a battery, a regulator, inverter. We bought them all over there, and I connected them up, and we did it. But I got all the info and all the expertise of the guy who did it in the first place. But it's easy to do, really, really easy to do. I think we got a solar installation with all the bits I mentioned. I think we paid 800 for it. But I actually think if you wanted to do the same again, it's probably only half that.
Thank you.
Okay, if that's all the questions, I thank you for your interest and spending some time with us today. Thank you, Brian, for your slides and your input. It's very, very interesting. Thank you. So
thank you very much.
Our next meeting will be the 14th of May. I'm not 100% sure yet on the topic. There's a couple of things floating around. Just need to type exactly who's doing what and when. But I'll stick that on the website and email stuff out to you in the meantime. But yeah, I think that's probably about it for today then. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks for coming along. And again, thank you the guys who are helping with the bus or going down to Green Health and Tadley and helping them. Much appreciated, I'm sure. So thanks everybody and see you next time. Bye then.
Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks,
Bye.
Paul. Thanks,
Thank you.
Brian.